So, so we've just said that with the present continuous, the first sort of basic way that we use it is when we're talking about an action happening now, right? So, and we've compared, in our chart, you can see, yes, this is sort of contrasted with the what happens in the simple present when we have sort of a present state. So there's this distinction between states and actions, and I'm going to have to try to get into that. So it's not very obvious to sort of to say what a state is. This is going to be sort of an involved explanation that I'll probably have to repeat when we see each other in class. So the difference between an action and a state is not something that's obvious at all. Okay, all right. But what we do know is that when to describe a state, we're going to use the simple present instead of the present continuous. And the best example of that would be the state. I would say the sort of classic state verb, the most basic state verb that exists in French and just about every language is to be, right? Okay. And with to be, we're never going to say, I'm not going to say this pen is being on the table, right? I'm not going to say this lamp is being in. No, I'm just going to say this lamp is, right? Okay. So you're very used to the fact that yes, with to be, we're going to use the simple construction, right? And if we're talking about now, we're going to use the simple present, of course, right? And that's because to be is quintessentially a state verb. Okay. And what does it mean to be a state verb? Well, first of all, states are kind of invisible, right? Remember that we said that we're talking about two different ways, the choice between the simple construction and be plus verb ing. This is a way of representing the activity. And we said with the simple construction, it's sort of like this very basic, so some people call it the zero mode of representation. It's not really, we're not really visually representing something that's happening now, right? Nothing's really happening. We're talking about something that is, not something that is doing, right? So because states are they're not really something we can, like, for example, being. I could say, draw me a painting of being, and you would look at me like, what do you mean? Being? And it doesn't. If I had a classroom if we were in a classroom and I asked all of you to give me a painting of being, they wouldn't look the same, right? But if I ask you to say, draw me a man walking down the street, right? These are something that you can visually see, right? So he is walking down the street. He, for example, is here, right? To be here, it's like an existential question, right? Philosophers write all these books, being and nothingness, things like that, and they're going to write a 600-page book about being, and they're still not going to be able to. No one's ever going to be able to describe what being is, right? It's a very complex, manifold thing, right? And we can't really. It's very complicated to represent, so we're just going to sort of evoke it in general using the simple construction, right? So that's probably good to keep in mind that the be is sort of like the quintessential state verb, and it's more important to note that there are others. What other state verbs are we going to have? Well, we're going to have things associated with I would say sort of things that have to do with sort of cognitive states. And we're also going to have, this could be cognitive state would be like knowing, to know, to understand. Okay? And then we can have things that are more, I would say, sensorial states. We could say something about, I don't know, we could say, feeling kind of depends. It could be either, we could say sort of hear, we could say sort of see, sometimes we can have feel, okay? Sorry about these things. So notice, if I'm going to say, I know the answer, I'm not going to say I am knowing the answer, right? I'm not going to say I am understanding what you say. I understand what you say, right? And what does that mean is that we are just talking about sort of the state of our mind, right? We're not doing something. We're just saying, in my mind, the knowledge of this thing exists in my mind, right? the understanding of this thing exists in my mind. I'm not in the process of doing an understanding activity. I'm not doing a knowing. Knowing is not an activity, right? And so one way to understand this also is that, let's say, learning would be sort of an equivalent. To learn is an activity that you do to acquire that mental state of knowing, right? And learning is going to be an action, and one way to describe them are going to be, and this is just to help you. You're not going to be quizzed on sort of this. These are sort of a little bit. It gets a little bit philosophical, but I can say, for example, let's say to give you an example of another action verb, like walking down. I don't know, walking. Sure. And it's important to note that, so walking is an action, right? I am walking, right? What's happening now? An action happening now. I am walking. And notice it depends on my will. Ça dépend de la volonté. If someone tells me to walk over there, I say, okay, yes. And I decide, c'est moi qui prends la décision de marcher, j'ai envie de le faire, donc je le fais. J'exerce ma volonté et j'accomplis cette activité. Okay, so actions are, and there are things that depend on the will. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And they're observable, right? Okay. Now states are things that are just there, right? And very often we can't really see them, right? We can see sort of visual manifestations, but we can't see the state itself, right? So for example, knowing, right? Now, we could learn, we can go to the library and you can get books out and you can spend time studying. I am studying, I'm doing these things. And then afterwards you have knowledge, right? You have the state in your head. But knowing, for example, if you know that, let's say, il y a toujours la distinction entre savoir et connaissance, mais disons que vous connaissez quelqu'un et vous faites semblant de ne pas connaître. Do you know him? Est-ce que vous pouvez essayer de ne pas le connaître? Ça dépend pas de votre volonté. C'est pas une activité, c'est pas une action que vous menez ou que vous entreprenez qui découle de votre volonté. So knowing someone is just the state of your brain, right? Whether you like it or not, you can't make yourself not know someone. If you're in court, you have an accomplice, un complice dans un procès, et vous connaissez la personne. Vous connaissez les personnes, si vous voulez pas ne pas les connaître, c'est fait. Ça dépend pas de votre volonté, donc c'est plutôt un état. So that has to do with things like, knowledge, knowing, understanding. Either you understand or you don't. It's not something, you can work, and then after you understand, it's the state of your brain. And this has to do with sort of affective, okay, I would say things like cognitive, things like love, hate. I like cheese. I love cheese. I hate, I don't know, buses. I don't know. So we're not going to say I am hating buses, right? Because we're talking about this sort of affective state when I that these things, the way they make me feel, right? Okay. So that's important to note, and notice, for example, if you think of someone that you really hate, you can't say, "Ooh, I want to like them." You hate them. It's just the way it is. If someone that you really love, there's nothing you can do about it, right? It doesn't depend on the will. So that's why things like, love, hate, feel, hear, see, know, understand, these are states, and as states, they're going to be compatible with the simple construction, right? Whereas things like actions, like walking, running, studying, learning, these things are things that you do, right? And as such, when one is happening now, it's going to be compatible with the B plus verb ing. Okay, so I think we'll stop there. That's sort of an introduction to this table. You can sort of maybe familiarize yourself with it. Of course, for the moment, we're only interested in the second and third column of this table on page 3 of the document of the English verb document, the simple present with the present continuous. We've only looked at the present state versus action happening now, right? And you can perhaps look through it, and that might make sense to you. We're going to look more through this in detail. So I will see you in a little bit over a week, and take care.